Hello, and welcome back to the Argyle HR Leadership Forum. My name is Eric Wallace with Argyle. A couple of notes before I turn things over to our esteemed speaker. First, a quick reminder to stop by our sponsor's virtual booth at any time during today's event and for the following week. Our partners are committed to providing you with valuable content and a great overall experience. At any time during today's event, you can visit their virtual booths from the main agenda page. To ask questions during the session, simply type into the Q&A chat and we'll address your questions at the end of the session. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker. Today we have Ben Eubanks, who is Chief Research Officer at Lighthouse Research. We're excited to have Ben with us for a fireside chat called How to Future-Proof Your Workforce and Build Organizational Resilience. Welcome, Ben. Over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Eric. And thank you so much, everybody, for being here. I'm so excited for this session, and I appreciate Workday for helping support this. So I'm looking forward to diving in, to share some stories with you, but also sharing a couple data points and examples of how we as employers can serve and support our people by understanding what they need from us. So it's going to be a great conversation. As Eric said, throw your questions in. We'll try to get to them as much as we have time today in the discussion. So one of the things I want to start off with is a quick story that'll probably make you smile, but it also paints this picture really well of what disruption does to us day to day. So disruption is what happens it's what results when we get an unexpected change that faces us. So years ago, my father had a piece of property and a storm came through and blew off a piece of the roof, kind of this corrugated stuff you see here on the screen, blew off a piece of this roof through a storm. And so he was lamenting the fact he was going to have to fix this. And I said, hey, let me go correct that. Let me go fix it. I'll go patch it up. And I'll tell you that these hands were not made for fixing things. Okay. I'm great at a computer. I'm great at typing. I'm not so great at swinging a hammer, but for some reason, who knows what it was, I decided, hey, let me try that out. So he gave me that shot. And so I went over there with my tools, and it's gracious. This is almost embarrassing to admit. I realized that if I drove the truck into this building and I put a ladder in the back, I could climb up out of the hole and onto the roof. And I got up there, I patched the hole up. I was so excited because I've got to tell you, it looked incredible. Okay. It looked brand new. It looked better than new. And I couldn't wait to get down and go tell everybody about this experience, about how I had fixed this thing. Maybe I had broken this curse where these hands are not made for fixing things. And then I realized that I had just patched the hole that I climbed out of to get onto the roof. And goodness gracious. So spoiler alert, I got down. All right. Eventually I figured out a way to get down without breaking any bones and any sort of trauma there. But I love telling that story because every time we solve one problem, we create another one. There's something else that's always going to happen. There will always be another issue. And the question is how we're going to respond, how we're going to react to those changes, how we're going to react to that disruption that faces us as organizational leaders and within a workforce as well. So hopefully that story, again, made you smile, but also it's a reminder that disruption is going to happen. Absolutely. But if we have the right information at our fingertips, we can respond, we can react quick enough in the right ways to be able to solve for it. So really, really quickly about me, so you know more about who you're hearing from today. My name is Ben Eubanks, Chief Research Officer for Lighthouse. I do a ton of research on the technologies and tools that we use to support and serve the workforce. But as you'll see in some of the conversation today, we do a ton of research as well on what's happening within the workforce, what they need from us as employers, what we are doing as HR and talent and business leaders to support and serve our workforce in a lot of different ways. And so from hiring to employee development, mental health and well-being, all these kinds of things we cover in the research. And I'll share a couple stats with you as we go through today to make it really clear to you what's happening, what's changing, and how we can use this stuff to take care of our people. Written a couple books, new one's coming out very soon that I'm so excited about around the talent shortage, what's happening there. And most importantly, I'm the dad of 4 kids, 12 and under. So there's a lot of crazy stuff going on at our house at all times. And I'm so thankful to have a moment of peace to be here with you and share today. So really quickly, here's what we're going to cover in our time together. I want to talk about some of the things that are changing in the environment. And some of this, you're going to say, oh yeah, we're living it every day. Okay, stick with me because I'm going to take a macro view and then come closer and take a little bit of a micro view of what's happening, what's changing. I want to talk to you after that about employee feedback as a strategy to solve for some of those things that are changing. So we're going to talk about the big problems, but then we're going to talk about how understanding what our people need from us in a rapid, iterative sort of way can allow us to get insights into that and solve those problems. And last, we'll have some open conversation there at the end to dive into and answer some questions, really help to paint a bigger and more broad picture of what's happening, what's changing. So excited for this. First off, what's happening? So I've gone out, I've gathered a couple of headlines to share with you, and they're headlines that you're probably familiar with. Companies are not sure what's happening. This company is making layoffs. This company is freezing their hiring. These things, this news is happening every single day, it feels like. But strangely enough, this news is also happening at the exact same time. The same day I grabbed those headlines about companies freezing hiring and laying off some of their people, I also grabbed these headlines: staffing shortages, companies hiring as quickly as they can. We're trying to find skilled labor. Companies are struggling to find the right people. And it's strange, but both of these things are happening at the exact same time, which has never before really happened in history. And so it's a strange, tumultuous kind of environment. And these things are happening at a global level. They're happening at a high level. So we're going to take it down a notch, take it down a layer, closer to the actual people. And I'll show you some of the things we're finding in the data that are changing expectations, changing sentiment when it comes to candidates, when it comes to workers, some of that disruption I alluded to at the beginning. For example, when we ask candidates, when you accept a job, how long are you committed to that essentially? We found that only 1 out of 3 people say, when I accept the job, I'm committed to that company. I'm going to show up. I'm going to do that job that I said I would do. The other 2 out of 3, by the way, say anything from, I'm going to keep my options open for a few weeks until I'm never going to be fully committed to this organization. And that makes me feel old-fashioned to say that, but I know that when I accepted a job offer in the past, I was making a decision, I was making a commitment, and yet that's changing. That's dramatically different than it was in the past. Not only that, but to take that a step further, 50% of the candidates that we surveyed have ghosted employers to some degree. They've applied for a job, they've disappeared, they've applied for a job, they've been accepted, they've been offered a job, and they didn't show up on day one, which is the most egregious form of it, honestly. So there's all these things that are changing about what's socially acceptable, and these kinds of disruptions are affecting and changing how employers are trying to solve the challenge in front of them in so many ways. And last but not least, in our most recent study, we saw that still, even after more than a year of record high people quitting their jobs, even after that, 1 in 4 people are still planning on changing their jobs in the near future. So all these things are changing. All these things are creating a very different environment for us. And it's really hard to be stable. It's really hard to understand what to do next. What decisions should we make when this is the world we're living in today? So now that I've shared some of those things with you, it's a bit for me to talk about resilience, right? All of us need to be resilient. We've had to be. We've been focused on this and had to be. But I'm talking about resilience at a higher level, at a company level, actually. And to me, resilience is about being able to respond quickly to change, being able to respond quickly and with minimal disruption. So not letting it upset the apple cart, not letting it turn everything upside down, but saying, yes, there's something changing. But at the same time, we're able to react to that in a positive way because we have the right information to do that. And speaking of information, the way you respond, by the way, you need information that's fast. It's got to be readily available. It's going to be right there at your fingertips. You can't have a change happen and say, okay, well, in 3 months, we'll know what to do, because by then it may be too late. So you need to be able to quickly respond and gather information. And number 2, it has to be clear and accurate. It has to be information that we can actually use to make a decision on. We have to be able to trust that. Okay, if it's external or if it's from some untrusted source, we're not quite sure. It has to be from somewhere close enough that actually can inform our decision on what to do next, what to do, what not to do, what to keep doing, right? The red, yellow, green sort of approach that we have probably all heard about in one business class or another over the years. And the reason I'm sharing these things about resiliency and disruption is because one of the key ways I see in the data that we can support this, one of the key ways that we as talent leaders can actually impact this is through employee listening. Listening and understanding what our people are saying, what they need from us, what their hopes are, allows us to cut through a lot of the things, the noise that might prevent us from really understanding what's going on. The people who are closest to the work are the ones who often have the best view of what's changing. And if we take the time, if we have the mechanisms, we have the tools and systems in place, we can actually listen to them, hear the heartbeat of what's going on, get our finger on the pulse, whatever metaphor you want to use, doesn't matter to me. But we can really gather the right information so we can then take action. This is the direct line that goes right to our people. And what's powerful to me is this isn't just about, oh, there's some more problems, there's some issues. That will come up for sure. You'll find things that need done. It will create some additional work because we're going to find out what people need from us. They're going to tell us about issues. They're going to tell us about challenges. But at the same time, they're also going to say, hey, I've got an idea. Hey, can I share this thing? Here's a way we could change this process and make it better. Here's a way we could serve customers and it would cost us less. You're going to hear from people who are closest to the work, sharing some of those things. There's a great book somewhere back there on that bookshelf I read years ago that I love. I reference it often, called The Idea-Driven Organization. And in the book, the authors talk about this wide body of research that says the people who are closest to the work are the ones where incremental innovation comes from. The people who are closest to the work can say, hey, here's an idea based on the things I'm seeing, the environment that I'm facing, the customer need that I'm familiar with. Here's a way to improve this. And if it improves at 2%, great, because the next idea will improve at 3%. And the next idea will start compounding and adding, and it's cumulative over time. You're getting all that benefit from nothing more than listening to your people. And so we've done some research around this to understand what this looks like, what it takes to do it well. And there's so many different aspects of really listening to our people that we could dive into here. But the number one thing, and you might have already thought of this, and if you have, kudos to you, because it's the first thing that I probably would have asked back when I was an HR leader, running an HR team, managing an HR department, having to make decisions like this. The first thing that I think of when I hear this is, okay, well, how often? How often should we be listening? Is it once a week, once a month, once a year? Right? How often should we be asking our people and listening to them and understanding what they need from us? And what's really interesting to me is when we look at the actual data, it's not like there's an exact number. There's not a golden number that says, you must ask exactly 2.7 times a month and all will be well. Sorry, I wish there was a formula, but there's not. What we find in the data, we actually surveyed thousands of workers from around the world. The thing that stands out is, number one, people are varied and different. You can't average people. They're across this very broad spectrum. There's not one answer that tells us the exact number. What we find is, instead of saying it's not about spacing, it's about sync. So if an employee says, I really want to give feedback to my employer, or I really want to share ideas, or I really want to be able to just open up about things, if they want to do that once a week and you ask them once a year, that's a mismatch. That's not synced up. And that does not make them feel like they belong. It doesn't make them feel like they are connected to the organization. It makes them feel like the company treats them inequitably, and it makes them feel like the company is not transparent. Well, goodness, it's just about asking questions, right? There's all the other things that layer into that equation. Those things are correlated there. So if someone wants to give feedback on a monthly basis and their employer allows them or gives them the opportunity to ask or share feedback on a monthly basis, those employees are much more satisfied. They're more likely to say they belong, and they're more likely to feel like they're respected and appreciated in the organization. So again, it's not about spacing. It's not about an exact number of times. It's about syncing it up and letting people do it when they feel led to. If an idea occurs to me, let's hope I don't have to wait until next February for our annual chance to share those ideas. No, I hope I have a chance as an employee to share that whenever that idea occurs to me, so that it's not being lost, it's being captured, and someone can get the value of that. So we're seeing all these really interesting findings coming out of this, the importance of listening to our employees and supporting and serving them. We actually even did a study a few years ago that proved that algorithms, right, systems, tools are better than humans at looking through all the different findings coming from this data and identifying trends and themes. So we did this experiment where we surveyed 1,000 workers, and we gave that to a couple different consulting firms and said, tell us what's going on with our people. And those consulting firms came back and said, well, 60% of your people have stress, or 40% of your people have issues with their manager, but it was very high level. It wasn't like we could actually take action on that. It was too broad and too vague. So then we took that same information, we passed it through an algorithm, and it said, by the way, the working mothers in your workforce, here are the 3 things that they say keep them from being fully productive at work. It could say for your sales team versus your engineers, your people who are in the Midwest versus the Southeast. It could give you all these different layers that you could cut through the data and find actionable things that you could do to support your people. It's anyway, incredible findings there. And just a reminder that even though I've been an HR leader, I've looked at employee survey responses, I've looked at these kind of things, even I know how hard it is to do that, because as humans, we have these innate biases that affect our decisions. If it affects how I buy bread at the store, it affects how I'm looking at employee survey data. If I have a manager I think is a bad manager, Every time I see a bad manager comment in that survey, I'm like, yeah, see, I knew it. And even that is confirmation bias. All right, let me flip ahead here. I was diving deep on that because I think it's really important. There's so many good things we could pull out of it and really share with you. So here to reiterate what I was sharing a minute ago, employees who can give feedback to their employers on their own terms, okay, when they want to, whenever the moment strikes, not only for the negative things, hey, I need this help, I need this support, here's something important to me, but also here are opportunities for us. Here's a way for us to serve customers. Here's a way for us to deliver more value. Either side of that spectrum, those employees feel more respected, accepted, and appreciated at work, which is the psychological definition of belonging. Employees that are high belonging feel like they have the chance to do this. Those employees have a sense or perceive that their employer is more open and transparent with them. Even though this is about them sharing, not about the employer sharing with them, okay? Get that. This is about employees sharing up to the employer. They still feel like the company is more open and transparent because they're willing to give them a channel to share. And perhaps most importantly, in today's environment, those employees are less likely to quit their job. They're less likely to have plans to leave the company if they feel like they have a channel, an avenue to share the things that matter to them. So it's really easy for us for me as an HR leader to think about all the HR metrics that align with this, right? Engagement and satisfaction and intent to stay, all those kind of things. But what's true as well beyond that, those are all true, but what's important beyond that, if you were talking to your business leaders, they may or may not get excited about engagement going up. They may be more excited these days about people more likely to stay. But overall, this is about business stability. If we know what's going on, if we're getting this insight from our people, we can react and respond more quickly as business leaders, and that leads to a more stable business. That leads to us being able to serve our customers without having gaps in staffing or without missing this critical thing that it was a blind spot we had as an employer because we weren't listening to the people who were at the front lines, who were willing to share the information if we gave them the chance. All those kinds of things align here. All those things are so important. And employees who do not have a chance to share, by the way, just to give you the counterpoint to this, employees who don't have a chance to share, they don't feel like their voice is heard, they don't get a chance to open up to their employer about these things, are twice as likely to have plans to quit their job. So these things all factor into this equation. So employers who are talent focused, in our data we call this group of companies talent centric. And you may have heard about some of these companies probably in the case studies and things you've heard over the years, but companies who say at the centermost is our talent. We take care of our people, they're going to take care of our customers, and our customers take care of our bottom line, looking at it as kind of concentric circles. If we take care of our people, they will take care of our customers, and they take care of the bottom line ultimately. And this channel, this avenue, this way we're giving them to interact with us and share with us as employers is such a powerful way to actually tap into that and make that work. All right. So if you want to see some of this research, by the way, you were curious about some of the findings, you want to understand more about those things, I'm happy to share that with you. You can reach out to me or the team, and we'll get you a copy. We actually have a big report coming out very soon on how these pieces fit together specifically for frontline workers and some of the things that are changing there, some of the expectations. So happy to share that with you. And I'm actually going to transition over and have a conversation with Eric now. What kind of questions, things like that. Eric, do you want me to leave the slides up? Or do you want to drop those off, sir?
Let's leave them up for now, I think.
Okay, perfect.
So thanks for that insightful presentation. And just as a reminder, audience members can enter their questions in the chat section of the interface. Now we're going to review some of the questions that we've had so far. First question is, you shared a lot of interesting trends as part of your presentation, and I'm curious to hear from you what you think organizations need to consider as they balance driving growth and meeting employees' specific needs.
So driving business growth and meeting employees' needs, for a long time, it felt like those two things were separate. We had to pick one or the other. We're going to drive growth, and who cares what happens with the employee needs? They're secondary. Or we're going to focus and prioritize our people, and hopefully we can grow as a business, but that's not right. And that's a false choice. These two things are interlinked, they're intertwined, And supporting our people does mean supporting the business, just like the talent-centric companies example I gave a minute ago. We see these talent-centric companies really leaning on these kinds of tools like we're talking about here, this employee listening, feedback, using that as a way to really drive value within the company. One of the things that gets me is back when I worked in the HR space, the common thing, the thing that most of us did, and you probably do this too, and if you do, there's no shame in that, but was we do a survey once a year. We'd ask our employees what's going on, what their needs are, things like that. The problem with that though, is let's say we do that survey in July, an employee has an issue in August, they know they're not going to have a chance for us to even hear about that issue for 11 months. So by the time that circles around again, the person is probably gone in today's market. We'd have missed our chance to actually connect with them, to answer their questions, to solve their problem, things like that. So anyway, back to the kind of key question. I don't think those two things have to be separate. We have to pick either serving the business or serving our people. Serving our people in today's marketplace, in today's environment, is serving the business because it creates more stability. We have workers there who are actually able to serve customers because they're not quitting and leaving and hating their jobs, all those kind of things. So that is my hope anyway, for all of you listening in, that you're creating this environment where your people show up, they're willing and able to work, to do their best. They feel like they're connected and they belong. And at the same time, the company sees the benefits of doing those kind of things.
Thanks, Ben. The next question is, we're seeing so much data coming through around how employees are rethinking about flexibility and hybrid work and the importance of career growth, especially with the cost of living and inflationary pressures that are causing the workforce to evaluate their current jobs and so on. What sort of insights would be the most helpful for people leaders? And I'm thinking about chief human resource officers and people who are leading talent teams. What are some of the metrics to watch?
I talked about some of the metrics a minute ago that HR leaders care about. Okay. Engagement scores, employee sentiment, those kinds of things. Those are in our wheelhouse. We can eat, breathe, and sleep those all day long. And yet, if we want to be taken seriously by the rest of the business leaders, by operational leaders, we have to be willing to talk about things that matter to them. One of the key ways I put that over the years when I do sessions on influencing your leadership team or how to build a business case is I say, okay, if I asked any of you right now, your significant other, your spouse, significant other, what's their favorite place to eat? Right? You can answer that question probably pretty quickly. You know what their favorite thing is. Or if you have a child, who's their best friend at school? We know those kind of answers. But if I said, hey, for your head of operations, what thing keeps them up at night? What thing most worries your CEO when it comes to competition? Do you know those kind of answers? Because knowing those answers allows us to solve the problems that they care about. And if we're solving their problems through the lens of talent, right, enabling our people to tackle those issues that they have, then that gives us a different level of credibility. It gives us a different level of access, and it gives us a different level of opportunity to start making positive changes for our people, because those leaders see that we get the business, we understand how it works. There was a young lady years ago, I'll never forget it. She had reached out to me and said, hey, I'm going for an interview. I'm trying to be an HR business partner, just stepping up in my career. I'm really nervous. Any recommendations? So I gave her some advice how to do that. And after the interview, I said, hey, how did it go? She said, I got the job offer, but I shouldn't have. What do you mean by that? Tell me more. So she said, I actually was going through this process, and the leader, this company makes rubber parts, like for tires, things like that. The leader said, why do you think our capital costs are going up every year? Like, as an HR leader, that's been a hard question probably for any of us to answer. And she said, well, rubber doesn't grow on trees. If you actually know anything about it, the rubber does come from a tree. Actually, it comes from a plant that they tap and use that to create rubber. And so the leader was laughing so hard, like this made them laugh, made them smile. But it's a reminder to me when I tell that story, the importance of really understanding what the business does, how it operates, where profits come from, the kind of customers you serve. Because the more we get those things, the more we can serve and support our people by understanding the business. Those things, again, don't have to be separate. All right, so I answered a couple of things there. I'm going to touch on one more thing that I didn't get to here as an example. So let's say you're looking at this data that's coming back from your employees for trends or themes. One of the themes that we keep seeing over and over again in our research is flexibility. What does flexibility mean to our people? Well, actually, flexibility for them may not mean the same thing as it means to you. When we ask the workforce in our study what flexibility means, where I work is number 5 on the list. There are a lot of other things that come in higher, like Number one was having more autonomy, more control in my daily work, being able to make more decisions without having someone looking over my shoulder or controlling my every action. What's interesting is that was number one for men, was that autonomy, how I work. For women, the number one response and flexibility was when I work. So more control over their schedule, being able to find ways to work around their other caregiving responsibilities or other things that were demands on their time. So there's all these different things that fit into this bigger equation. And once you start seeing a trend come up like flexibility, like work-life balance, like creating an inclusive culture, whatever things are coming up from your workforce, it gives you a chance to say, okay, what are we going to do now? How are we going to actually step in and take action? Because I know sometimes the concern with, okay, if we ask employees, then there's this expectation we're going to act on it. But I found overall that the most important thing is to, when that feedback comes in, the inputs come in, is to acknowledge them, number one. And the ones you can take action on, absolutely do. The ones you can't take action on, don't act like they didn't happen. Just say, we hear that, we see this, right? We're trying to work towards this, we're trying to solve this problem, but you don't. No one expects you to solve every problem. If you show them you're making progress, they're going to care. Your workforce is going to care. And that ties back into what the original question was around, right? Engagement metrics, sentiment, all those kinds of things. All right, Eric, that was a long answer. Sorry, but come back to you now.
Great, thank you. The next question is, how can people leaders really create resilience within organizations using some of these measures? And how can executives and people who manage teams make better business decisions using employee feedback and people data? Maybe you could share an example of how people are doing this.
Okay, so I'll share you two positive examples, one from very close to home for me, and one from another company I learned about recently that I think is a great example. So using this information, like in the whole core of this conversation today, is how can we use the stuff coming back from our people to respond as a business? How can we respond and change things and lead to better resiliency for our organizations? So the first story I'll tell you, years ago, I worked for a company when I was the HR leader there. And one of our engineers on the team, very business savvy. She was not like an engineer at all. And she actually is now the CEO of that company all these years later. So she's changed her role many times over the time, finally ending up where she should be, I think. But she came up with this idea and said, hey, we're pricing our software this way. What if we change the pricing model? She came up with this idea that she shared with our leadership. We actually used this thing called the Big Ideas Database to gather ideas from our employees. It sounds very grandiose. At the time, it was nothing more than just a SharePoint site, a simple way to do that all those years ago. And she shared this idea for changing our pricing model on our software. It ultimately became a multi-million-dollar product line for our company. So created new revenue for the business. She was rewarded very well for coming up with the idea. It was one of those things where if she had not had a place to share that, if she had not had a receptive set of leaders who wanted to hear that, if we had not had a culture that encouraged people to bring their best ideas to work instead of holding on to them for themselves because they were worried someone would steal it from them, right? We had the right things in place to enable that. And the company reaped the results of that. And she did as well for sharing it. So I love that story. It's a good example. There's one other one I heard of recently. So that was a story from more of a engineering services type company. So I heard recently about Kawasaki. One of the things that they have done in one of their manufacturing facilities is they've set up what they're calling their parent shift, because they kept hearing from people who've been leaving the workforce in the last 2 years. Hey, I love the work, or I appreciate the opportunity, but I have to drop my kids off at school. And so the schedules aren't working out for me, or I have to pick my kids up, or I've got caregiving responsibilities for maybe an aging parent, right? They've got other things drawing on them and they can't fit their work into their life. So Kawasaki set up what they're calling their parent shift. And so workers can clock in at 9 a.m., clock out at 2 p.m. It's a shortened day, but they're able to work those hours when they don't have other things going on in their life. They can fit their work into their life instead of the other way around. And what's really interesting is the teams actually told me that their productivity during that shorter shift is higher than productivity on the longer normal shifts, because those people are so thankful and so loyal because they're getting an opportunity when they would have otherwise been shut out of the job market potentially, or had to do something else that was, kind of gig work, things like that, that aren't as long-term, that aren't as committed, that don't give them stability in their own household. So I love that story and that example. And it all came from them saying, what do we need? What do people need from us? How can we serve them better? What are people looking for when it comes to work? Can we think about changing this up? Because a lot of manufacturing organizations and operations are very structured and rigid, and they're not willing to or able to change their structures up around scheduling, things like that, because everything's built around this. but they realize, wait a minute, if we're going to access this new pool of talent that right now is closed off to us, we're going to have to make some different business decisions to enable that. And because they did, that lined up with the talent decisions, and it led to this incredible set of results for them. So I've been telling that story every chance I get to encourage anyone else who works in an inflexible type of industry or job to remind them that some of those things we think are true, that are constant, that are immutable and can't be changed, actually can be when the pressure gets high enough, we're willing to do that.
Thank you. The next question is that today, if we look at the role of people leaders, and that's to create a culture where everybody feels included, they also need to ensure that there's trust, transparency, and collaboration within teams. What advice do you have for HR leaders who are currently struggling to achieve that?
Culture where everyone feels included. That's a great tagline. It's really hard to do. So I'll tell you that one of the things we see in the research, this study of 5,000 global workers, a couple of things we came up with. Number one, I was trying in this research to outline the impact a company has, the way we operate, the things we do, some of the decisions we talked about today, and how much impact that manager has. Because everything for a long time has told us that managers matter so much to someone's feeling of being connected, being included, being supported at work. And what I found was both of those play a big role, but in different ways. So for example, on that manager side, if we want to create a culture where everyone feels included, we could wave our magic wand, and every manager would care about their people. And that would work. That would solve so many problems. We know we don't live in that fantasy world. That magic wand is broken. But just to give you some ideas on what that looks like, employees told us that if their manager understands them, if they truly get them, not just my job title or my tasks at work, but who I am, what motivates me, the reason that I work is not just for a paycheck but because I'm supporting contributing to my kids' college fund or whatever else, the things that matter to me, right? The managers who understand their people are 6,000% more likely to actually support them consistently. Statistically, that means that, guess what? If you're a manager and you don't take the time to actually understand your people, you cannot support them. It's not going to happen. It's completely impossible statistically to do that. So managers who pay attention, who are willing to understand their people, who are willing to give them feedback, to recognize them, to support them, those leaders who are doing those things are going to create a workforce that really does feel included. They feel engaged. They're excited to come to work. Now, the other side of this equation, though, is on the employer side. What things can we do? Because none of us have the power to make those managers great. So we have training opportunities. We have other things we can do to help support the managers. But there are other sides too of this equation. One of the things in the study we saw is that if workers say their company gives them a chance to share their feedback, as we talked about today, the manager gives them tools to manage their work life, maybe managing their shifts, checking their pay stubs, taking online training. They give them tools like that to help them manage the things they have to do at work. If an employee says that, they're more likely to say that they feel like they're treated equitably by the business and by the organization. They're more likely to say they have plans to stick around. They're not planning to leave and quit. So all these kind of things fit together. And it'd be so much easier to say, okay, just do this one thing and it solves all of that. There's a lot of varying pieces to this. If I had to boil it down, that manager plays a key part in this relationship. And if we help managers, let's take it back to the conversation today around employee feedback. We help managers by giving them a way to look at the feedback from their people and understand what the people need from them in a way that's not confrontational. It's not weird and awkward. It says, hey, here's what your people need from you. And here's some guidance on how to take actions to actually close some of those gaps you might have, or how to take action to celebrate and elevate your people when they're doing great work. If we're enabling our managers to do those kind of things, that's one of the highest leverage activities we can accomplish or perform as talent leaders.
Great, thank you. Our last question for today is about quiet quitting. There's a lot of conversation around different interpretations of quiet quitting, whether that's burnout or better boundaries or disengagement. What is your view on this?
Oh my goodness. So quiet quitting, we could probably spend an hour just debating, discussing this one. I'd say it's a little of all of the above there. So overall, what we're looking at in the data is employees are seeking higher pay broadly. That's happening across the spectrum. But other than that, stress and burnout is one of the top reasons people are quitting their jobs. One of the top things that's driving them away from their work is the stress and the burnout that they're facing. And so employees who are saying, that's enough, I'm going to pull back a little bit, right? maybe we need to accept that and understand that as employers. Going back to the piece I mentioned a few minutes ago about managers who understand their people, a manager who understands and supports their team is going to see those signals, and it's going to be willing to step in and say, hey, I need you to take a day off, refresh, come back, take a long weekend, whatever you got to do. They're going to try to find ways to serve and support them. But there are other angles. Obviously, it's not the only one. So let's say a company hires someone and expects them to work 80 hours. Well, guess what? They're probably going to be disappointed, because that company should hire 2 people. They want 80 hours worth of labor, because most people are not willing to do that. There are some companies where the kind of hustle culture is part of how they operate. But overall, most workers aren't interested in that kind of thing. They're not looking for that kind of opportunity, we'll just say. The punishment is another way to put it, where they're going to work in a place like that. So I'll also say, though, if this, talking about quiet quitting, if this is a way to shame or blame those people who show up and they're just quietly doing their work and they're getting their things done and they're accomplishing their tasks we've asked them to do, if they're just doing those things and they're not staying until midnight or doing all these other kind of things that are above and beyond or whatever else, so what? I am so thankful for the people I've worked with over the years who showed up, who didn't complain, who didn't cause a fuss. They just did their work quietly, excellently, and left and went home and did whatever else is important to them after work. We need those kind of people in the workplace. When you have a bunch of rock stars, they're messy, they're loud, they create a lot of noise. Right? So we need a number of people who are willing to come to work and perform at that level that doesn't need any flash, doesn't need any sort of fanfare. They're just doing their work and accomplishing it. So there's a couple different layers to that quiet quitting thing. And depending on what perspective you come from, you might have a different opinion on it. That's perfectly fine. Feel free to throw your thoughts in there on what you think about it or what your take is on it. But that's my take, trying to look at it from a couple different perspectives, because I've seen, who you talk to, everyone has a little different lens on what that looks like. I try to do it justice by saying there's all these different perspectives here. There's different ways of looking at this problem and turning it over. But overall, I will tell you, I just finished talking about managers a minute ago. If a person has a leader like that is showing up, that is supporting them, that is taking care of them, they're not going to be one of these that's thinking about quitting and silently doing it or whatever else. I'll tell you a quick story about a manager before we wrap up here. So years ago, there was a leader who worked at our company. I worked for an organization, the very first HR job I ever had. We had about 600 employees and 50% turnover a year. So you know exactly what my job was, right? As the new person on the team, I had that enviable job of processing new hire and termination paperwork all day, every day. That's all that I did. Oh gosh, it was exhausting. And some days I had the same person's hire documents and term documents the same day. It was that kind of just chaos. And so I started digging into our old files and gathering some data on why people quit our company, trying to find out what trends were there, what turnover trends were there. And what I found was there were a number of people who quit within the first 30 days, like 50% of them quit in the first 30 days on the job. So there are probably some indications of things we could do, some actionable things we could do to solve that. But I also found that between the managers, it was all over the place how much turnover they had. And I found that one of our managers has turnover of around 10%. And I thought that I had calculated that wrong or something else. And I went back and double checked. No, it was accurate. And so I went to sit down with this manager, hoping to find out what he was doing. Because if I could copy and paste those activities across the business, it would save us, thousands and thousands of dollars in training and hiring costs. And so I went and sat down. His name was Antoine. And so I'm sitting down with Antoine. He had a new hire come in that day. So I'm just kind of watching over his shoulder, shadowing him, trying to take notes on what sort of things he's doing. And this new hire comes in. They're taking a job doing direct care for the mentally ill. So it was a really challenging job. It was a physical job. It paid like $7.50 an hour. So it was not glorious or glamorous or high paying even. It was a really hard job. And this person sat down in front of Antoine and he said, "Hey, I'm so glad you're here. Welcome to my team. I saw something special in you when I interviewed you, and I can't wait to have you participate and contribute here. You're going to do great things. And if you ever need anything, I want you to know my door's open, not just the physical door, but emotionally. I'm here for you. It is my job to make you successful, whatever I have to do. So welcome to our team. Glad to have you. Can't wait to see you succeed." And he's talking to this person who's making $7.50 an hour. And I'm sitting there thinking for a second, maybe I should just quit my job in HR and go work for Antoine, because he is this incredible, inspiring leader. But I love that. I love the way he approached people. I love the way he loved on people. It was just a great example of what true leadership looks like. And so when I'm seeing these conversations around quiet quitting, things like that, I have to imagine that those people who are talking about that don't have a leader like an Antoine. They don't have a leader that's willing to step up, willing to lead them, willing to love on and serve them in the way that enables them to be their very best self at work. So I took a little tangent there to share you a story about a leader that I love and I appreciate, who goodness, I haven't seen him in years. I actually told him recently that I share his story pretty regularly. He was blown away by it because he's so humble. But I love sharing that story. And so there's a couple thoughts on the quiet quitting piece, and hopefully that helps you to put your mind around it a little bit and think about some of the nuances and maybe brush it off and get back to work like I have.
Great. Thanks, Ben. I want to thank everyone for joining us today for this fantastic session. This session, along with all of today's content, will be available on demand following the event.